Ranjit Hoskote is not a complete stranger. He was at the retreat for 3 weeks in February, and he did a program with us. And so it's always nice to be talking to people who you know a little bit more about, because he has these fancy titles that he goes with. He's a cultural theorist and a curator. And I'm like, ये सब होता क्या है? And we are very basic at the Himalayan Writing Retreat. You know that, right? So, but I'm going to read out an abbreviate. His bio is really long. So I asked him if he could share a shorter one. So he's been kind and he's shared a shorter version of the bio. This is the short version, okay? So, but I'm going to get to the questions after this. So Ranjit is a poet, cultural theorist, translator, and curator. His collections of poetry include Vanishing Acts, New and Selected Poems, 1985 to 2005. That's Penguin, then Central Time, Jonah Whale, which was published in the UK as ARC, by ARC as the Atlas of Lost Beliefs. I'm sorry. Um, Hunch Prose, which was published by Penguin in 2021. Ice Light by Wesleyan University Press in the US, and also by Penguin in India. Ranjit's translation of a celebrated 14th century Kashmiri woman mystic poet has appeared as I, Lalla. That's this book right here. Um, the poems of Lal Ded, and the, more recently, his translation of the poems of the great 18th century Urdu poet Mir Taqi Mir has been published as The Homelands and Ocean. That's this book right here. Hoskote has been honored with such prestigious awards as the Sahitya Academy Golden Jubilee Award, the Sahitya Academy Translation Award, and Sanskriti Award for Literature, the S.H. Raza Award for Literature, and the 7th Mahakavi Kanhaiya Lal Sethia Award for Poetry. He has been a fellow of the International Writing Program, University of Iowa, and has held writing residencies at Villa Volberta, Munich, the Polish Institute, Berlin, the Theater der Welt, SN Malheim. And in 2022, Ranjit was visiting professor of creative writing at Ashoka University. And in 2025, he was visiting professor at the Himalayan Writing Retreat. So, Ranjit, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for making the time. It's always brilliant to have people of your caliber, and it's a delight for people also to speak to you. And it's great this time that we have poets and translators. We have you as well as Daisy Rockwell. But this was kind of the LinkedIn version of your bio. But tell us, where did you start with literature? I don't want to talk about craft and all those things so much. I want to just get a little bit of your story, because I think your own story is very inspiring. So tell us a little bit
Well,
about how did this whole literature thing start? Why didn't you become an engineer? Why not B.Tech?
ah, partly because my parents wanted me to go to art school,
Hmm.
but that I'm kind of jumping into the middle of the story. First of all, let me thank you, Chetan,
Of course.
both you and Vandita and Renu and everybody at the Himalayan Retreat. It was absolutely marvelous to spend that time up in the hills, to be in a space of repose, and to also then work with colleagues around a table and to think through questions of writing, creativity, how we expose ourselves to the natural world.
Thank you.
So that was very special, and now I look forward to this gathering here. How did literature start for me? Actually, I uh, I came into a world of books and the arts because
Mm-hmm.
my parents were completely immersed in the world of the arts. They were
Lovely.
very responsive to music, particularly. They read extensively, and they didn't see the arts as something optional or external or alien to normal life. The arts were just part of their normal life. Even as a child, I remember being taken off to art galleries on the weekends. The museum was a pivotal point. Reading was always present. So I didn't need to escape into the world of books. The world of books was, in some ways, always there. So, in a sense, I just grew up with a sense of responsiveness to cadence, to beat, to image, to color, and very early on knew that that's really what I wanted to do. in the beginning, I thought no matter what else I do, this is going to be the core of my life, and eventually found a way of actually making it uh, my main way of being. And I wasn't joking about my parents wanting me to go to art school. They really did. Because at some point, because they saw where my interests lay, they said it's no point to doing whatever else it is that people are doing. And it was entirely my own fault that I did science for 2 years because I wanted to do architecture.
Okay.
And that didn't work out. So then I took a gap year, also unknown in my generation. Traveled, read, came back, and then did a degree in the social sciences and began to write on the arts during that period. Yeah.
All right. Lovely, lovely. And then I could also see that, you went into this, I would call it a club, but there was this very eclectic group of young poets who were all, and fortunately, a couple of them teach for us also. So,
Yes.
Jerry Pinto, Arundhati,
Yeah.
all of you have shared this influence where you were inhabiting this world with, Nassim Ezekiel and
Yeah.
Dom and Adil Jasawala. So, tell us about that time. It must have been really heady and special.
It was. And when you look back, I mean, when we look back, Jerry and Arundhati are really amongst my oldest friends. We were very young people at a time in Bombay when the arts were not professionalized in a narrow way. So we just grew up among poets like Nissim Ezekiel, Dom Moraes, Giv Patel, Adil Jasawala, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra, and uh, painters like Akbar Padamsi, Jahangir Sabawala, Meli Gobai, so many people that I can think of, Badri Narayan. It was an astonishing time that has vanished completely. And every now and again, the three of us feel we should write some kind of collective memoir of that time.
Right.
Filmmakers like Mani Kaul, Kumar Shahani, Arun Kopkar. What came out of that for us was, first of all, the sense that the arts are not in silos, that something that you learn from a filmmaker could be applied when you write a poem. Something that you're learning from bilingual poets like Dilip Chitri or Arun Kolatkar opens you up to different language universes. So these were amazing blessings. And then we, at some point, began to run a platform called the Poetry Circle.
Right.
Yeah, this had been established by poets a generation older than ourselves. But we really ran it with a great deal of attention for a number of years. That was also a form of collective activity, I think, for us. We would not only present our own work, but really work with other people. There was a series of lectures and readings and panels that we did. We would invite visiting poets. We had Aga Shahid Ali do a workshop for us, April 1991, absolutely memorable. Arvind Mehrotra would do workshops, Shanta Gokhale. So we were also, so to speak, genre agnostic. It wasn't because we were working on poetry, that was the only genre we were interested in, which also is the reason I think why we write across different genres.
Yeah. And that was actually, that is probably where the other interests come from. That was going to be my next question, is that in addition to being a poet and a translator, you're also a cultural theorist and a curator. So tell us about that crossover. Tell us about, how you entered that world and how does it inform your writing and vice versa.
The curating actually was a logical, organic step from my writing on art. I mean, I also began to write on art very early because there was an extraordinary arts editor called Shanta Gokhale, who was also a major novelist, playwright, and translator. She had just started the arts page for the Times of India, Bombay. So a number of us actually were in a kind of wonderful circle around her. And she had the incredible courage and trust to give very young people the mandate of writing on the arts. Wow. And it was great for us to really, refine our curiosity about creativity, about artistic expression, forms of writing, engaging with the readership. We were really, when I think back about it, I think back on this time, we were really in our late teens and then our early 20s when all this happened.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But there was also great openness to not starting with some single genre as the only one to be devoted to. The idea was that, in a sense, not narrow function, but the call of the material would determine what the form was. So at some point in my life as an art critic, I felt that it might be a good idea to show rather than tell,
Mm,
instead of making art historical arguments. I mean, I would
mm,
make those arguments anyway, but it was an idea to also look around at artistic practices and bring 3 or 4 of them together and say, this is what I mean as something that is very interesting. This is how, for instance, abstraction is now moving out of 2 dimensions and into sculpture or
okay.
into architecture, into something immersive.
Mm,
So it was a way of engaging with an audience, both through the word and through space, mass, volume, the
mm,
the choreography of an exhibition. And I realized that because I'd always had this profound interest in architecture, curating for me also was a way of thinking about space, movement in space, architectural interventions, and so on. And at that point, another part of my life, I think I was very blessed to come into contact with people who became mentors. Okwe and Wezor, the Nigerian American curator, who unfortunately passed away far too early. He curated Documenta 11, the 7th Guangzhou Biennale, at some point the Venice Biennale as well. He was a major figure. You know, Okwe was very, very inspirational and seminal for me because he was in rebellion against this idea that the global art world takes its cue only from West Europe and
the
North
West.
America.
Yeah.
You know, so he really showed how all kinds of vibrant creativity was being expressed in what he called the off centers, in
Mm,
Lagos, in Delhi, in Bangalore, in Bangkok,
mm,
Johannesburg, look where you will.
mm.
So this was a very marvelous way of thinking about a much larger world of artistic expression, which also had a political aspect to it.
Sure, sure.
You know, so
Right.
that's an and I know cultural theory is like a it's a convenient shorthand because it's a hybrid practice. It draws on cultural anthropology, on political science, on theory to make sense of how we express ourselves in symbolic terms and
Okay.
how those symbolic expressions have place in larger cultural and political and economic histories. So when you
Right.
look at an art object, in a way, it's a training in looking comprehensively at an art object. Not only was it what it's saying in some aesthetic transcendental way, but
Mm,
where did the materials that go into it come from? By
right.
what trade routes? By what asymmetries of power does it land in a museum? Now, once you start
Mm,
asking these questions, you have a much deeper sense of anything you're looking at.
wow. Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So, uh, for someone who does so many things, you're a very calm and composed man. Like I didn't see you ever, get frazzled in the 21 days that you were at the retreat. So, and we have many writers here who are struggling to find time to write, and they just have like one single day job. So, tell us the secret. How do you do it?
Oh my God. Um, I mean, what you're not seeing is all the deadlines that are trailing and all the tearing of hair that happens off screen. No, no, no. But we've spent a lot of time together. You know that it's just been an inner discipline of some kind from early on,
Right.
because I think you just lose psychic energy by being agitated.
Yeah.
That's part of the story. But also, I actually had a day job of one kind or another for about 19 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Okay.
first as a freelance writer for largely the Times of India. Then I was on the editorial staff of the Times of India.
Okay.
I wrote edits. I started a column called The Speaking Tree,
Hmm.
which at that point it was meant to be a clearinghouse about the religious imagination, about spirituality across traditions. It's
Okay.
turned into something else now, but originally it came from this sense of a pluralist understanding of religion and
Mm,
spirituality. So
mm,
there was that. Then I worked with a Hindu. I was part of a team that brought out the Folio, which was a beautiful periodical of ideas, but that kind of fell by the wayside at some point.
mm.
So yeah, I think maybe uh, there's no great secret to share, but I find that I tend to gain energy from what over the years I've come to think of as cross training.
Right.
So, you might be doing one kind of thing. And, if you say to yourself, this is a waste of my time and taking me away from my creativity, you're actually setting up a kind of mental block.
Hmm.
When I think back, I think I learned all kinds of amazing things from a very unlikely person, Samir Jain, who was vice chairman, who still is vice chairman of Bennett Coleman, the Times
Oh,
of India group. I
okay.
worked closely with him for a number of
Sure.
years.
Right.
And most people see him as this, personification of commerce and management and so on. But there was so much to learn from him in terms of managing time, circulating energy,
Hmm.
maintaining a curiosity about things that are not immediately pertinent to your so-called work.
Right. Right.
So I think it's also about maintaining a certain openness to unlikely sources and maintaining a curiosity about the world.
Yeah. Well,
And yeah, and switching among things.
hmm.
Sometimes I find that if I'm working on a poem and it isn't moving in a particular way, if I switch to a translation project or an essay that I'm working on, it all turns into a kind of mutually nourishing set of
Right.
preoccupations.
The one thing I did notice when you were there is that, we would spend time in the evenings together, but you
Around the
were really
Bukhari.
around the Bukhari. Yeah, that's gone now because it's
Oh,
become
yeah, of
warmer.
course.
Yeah, but during the day, you and Nancy, both of you would be diligently at work. You would not be distracting. You would not come and, pass for an hour over lunch. It would be very clinical that, okay, we're here to eat, you eat and you move on. And it was very interesting because we had Gurcharan Das just a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about, and he said that, from 6 to 12 in the morning, I work on my agenda. And then after 12 is when I will open myself up to other people's agendas.
Right.
And that's just another way of phrasing it, but I thought
Yeah,
he put it very nicely, and it really stuck in
it's
my
perfect.
mind, saying,
Yeah.
you have to know what is your agenda, and you
Yeah.
have to go after your agenda for some part of the day,
Yes.
and then open yourself up. And that means no email, no WhatsApp till noon every day. So he made an exception when he was teaching for us, but yeah, I thought that was quite profound actually. And you
He's
seem to be
amazing.
living that yourself. So yeah,
Trying to.
yeah, great. No, that's awesome. Um, so I'm going to let you guys in a secret. Okay. Uh, I, you wouldn't guess it, but Ranjit and I are roughly the same age, right?
Oh my goodness.
And he's much, much better looking than me,
Oh,
right?
nonsense.
So I'm like, you're a really good looking guy. So that has to have got you into trouble, right?
Oh my
So tell us
goodness.
about tell us about what happens. I mean, and you're an art curator and you're doing all this curation stuff and you're doing all these other things and you're this aspirational poet. So I'm sure there must be fangirls who come to you and say, autograph दे दो. और उसके बाद क्या होता है फिर वो भी हमें tell us, let us in on a little bit of
Autographs are
that.
passe. Everyone wants selfies today, Chetan.
Ah, yeah, okay,
That's the
sorry.
new
I,
autograph.
I'm I well, I'm older than you by a year, so there you go.
Oh gosh. No, no, you're very kind to say, but you're in infinitely better shape. I mean, it's incredible to see you wandering around the hills and valleys and so on. So yeah. No, no, no. This is, truly, I mean, that was for us very inspirational. The athleticism of it. Oh gosh, have I got into trouble? No, hopefully not. But or nothing printable. But I think what tends to happen is that I've had this experience through my life that people who see me more or less for the first time say, "We thought you were much older," and I have to now say I am much older than I was when I started to write when I was very young. So I think that might be one of the recurrent experiences I've had. And then I think to myself, there's some portrait in an attic that's taking all the blows of life on my behalf, kind of thing. But no. But more seriously, I think I've noticed this with a number of people in the world of creativity. That if your neurons are firing, if you're just constantly renewing yourself,
Right.
not just physically, I think it's also how you manage to remain
Mhm.
nimble and agile.
Mhm.
I just last week spent an evening with someone who's 90 years old, Ramdas Bhatkal, who's a musician and a publisher, popular percussion, uh, uh, an authority on Gandhi. I mean, he did his PhD when he was 75,
Oh, wow.
not because he wanted a job at a university, because he just wanted to do that,
Right.
And just to talk with him, I find myself thinking, oh God, what's the name of this guy? And I should try not to look in my phone And there was Ramdas Bhatkal without pause, remembering things that happened 70 years ago.
Wow.
So yeah, so it's these ideals that I find are, of a certain kind of youthfulness of mind, which I think are crucial.
Right. Great. Thanks. And like I was looking at both of these books, the Lal Ded book as well as
Yeah.
Mir Taki Mir. And I was fascinated by how do you research a book like that? I mean, like in the Lal Ded's case, 13th century. So how do you even find out what was written, what is true, what is not true?
Ah,
And how do you kind of fact check things and make sure that what you're s- what you're talking about is highly credible? I mean, of course, there's
right.
a bunch of notes at the back and
Yeah.
a massive amount of referencing that has been done. But still, where do you even start with a project like this?
With the Laldeed, I mean, that took me about 20 years
Oh, wow.
from start to finish. But I started that when I was about 21 or something like that. Um, there's an also it for me the project itself, and I hesitate to call it a project because it was a life commitment. It was a way in the beginning. It was a form of going back into my own lost ethnic history uh, because of the connections to Kashmir, the ancestral connections. For me, it was overcoming the diaspora and distance to find my way back. But very, very soon, it became much larger than me and my particular diasporic preoccupations. It was, in the first place, it meant bearing witness to this incredible work. It was also a project that was unfolding in the 20 worst years in Kashmir's history, with oppression, militarization, massacres on all sides, and just the torment of everyday life. So there was no way to do this in a neutral. No translation is neutral in the first place. All
Mm,
translations are political, but this
mm,
was particularly so because there was no way in which I could just have this translation sit in a vacuum. It had to be responsive to the historical moment. So along the way, it was relearning. The language was lost, so I had to learn the language, which I duly did. But it was also going through the early materials, looking at earlier translations, seeing what choices were made there, uh, and just listening to the linguistic evidence and realizing that it wasn't all composed at one shot in the 14th century.
right.
What actually has happened, as the linguistic evidence tells us, is that it was composed by generations of anonymous contributors. They were
Mm,
women and men, Muslims and Pandits, Sufis, scribes, a whole range of peasants, whoever they were. So in a way, it's an incredible collective voice. So it was an extremely emotional experience as well, working on this. But it meant being in the archive, it meant being in the library, it meant
mm,
consulting prior
mm,
scholarship,
mm.
and also along the way, honoring and cherishing the people who had done translations of the material before. Because, translation doesn't, it's not an individual activity. You're part of an assembly of people who've done this over the years.
Right.
Likewise with the Mir, also political because it's coming out of a language that is being politically put in the dock today by very dominant forces in this country who, for some obscure reason, seem to think that Urdu is a foreign language. It's the one language that actually really has been nourished by sources from everywhere, and it emerged here as much in the Deccan as in the Gangetic Doab. So
Mm,
it's an
mm.
incredible pan-Indian language,
Yeah,
and Mir is an incredible poet. So these are treasures that we should be proud of, not trying to erase from the collective record. So
absolutely. Yeah.
so there again, working on this was working through Urdu scholarship, literary criticism, to see what its focal points were and how one might present another way of reading this material. So I think in all these cases, it's also how to be a contributor to an ongoing tradition of translation and criticism.
Yeah.
So none of us are soloists.
Yeah.
I think there's a tendency when you're sitting at your desk to think, here I am, solitary in the world.
Yeah.
Well, none of us are actually solitary. You're continuing dialogue sometimes with people who've been dead 800 years
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
or could be
Um,
next door.
so I remember we had this conversation when we were at the retreat and I asked you how many languages do you know and you told me eight. Have you ever learned a language just for the purpose of being able to translate a text? or did you sort of just know all it
No, no, no.
early on?
No, I grew up in an extended family that was fairly multilingual. So it was actually quite multilingual. So there was um I don't think I remember any time when I wasn't translating in one form or another, even as a child.
Okay,
Not to publish a translation, but to make sense of the world.
sure.
But there are also languages that my parents knew, which I never got around to learning. For instance, I mean, they'd spent parts of their lives in the South, so
Okay.
they knew Kannada. My father knew Tamil. I know neither, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So, so to me, translation is always a series of doors. You've got to knock and try and enter another world.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah. So not only
Great.
because there's the possibility of, sometimes it's just for the pleasure of reading.
Mm, sure.
Like, yeah,
Yeah, and I can feel that loss, like when I'm reading the Laldev, the poetry also.
yeah,
I can see that this must have rhymed, that I can sort of make a Hindi version of it in my own
yes,
head, and I think that, maybe this approximates what she might have said in
right,
Kashmiri.
right.
But you can just sense that there's got to have been depth which somehow has changed. I wouldn't say it's been lost, but it's changed, it's
Yeah,
shifted because of the translation process. So yeah,
yeah,
that's
yes.
very, very evident when you're reading. But it's so hard hitting, it's so beautiful. You guys, yeah, 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 definitely check it out.